We've seen how Solon's reforms addressed some of the economic problems, some of the political issues of his time, while allowing, as we see, for a great deal of additional mobility. It nonetheless didn't really overturn the underlying inequalities in Athenian society. How could it? And shortly after Solon's reforms, there is evidence of continuing tension and trouble. About 4 years after, that is in the year 590, 589, there's what's called anarchia. Our word anarchy comes from it. This is a year without an archon. And somewhat later than that, there is a record that one archon named Damasius stayed in office, refused to leave office for over 2 years, although his term was to last only for one. It's clear that he probably wanted to make himself tyrant. In the meantime, down in the south, the Spartans had tried to expand a little bit more. We saw how they conquered Messenia, and now they undertook some kind of campaign against the neighboring state of Tegea. It didn't work, and they started instead to form alliances, first with Tegea, and then with the other states around them. So there's an informal kind of Peloponnesian League coming together. Returning to Athens, still more indications of trouble. There was a brief experiment with a sort of board of governors, replacing the archons. This was quickly abandoned, but there is clearly some kind of upheaval in the works. The form it took was that of regional factions. The coast, the plain, and the so-called over the hill. These are led by, well, it's a technical term, big men. This was coined by an American anthropologist, Marshall Solon, who was working in the Southeast Pacific. And big men are informal leaders of groups who maintain their power through a combination of having a group of military supporters and by competitive generosity, by giving out gifts to their followers, and by engaging in competitions, both of generosity and of, well, more violent forms with other big men. The regional factions, as I said, were three. The coast was led by one Lycurgus, the plain, one Megacles, and the beyond the hills group by Peisistratos. It's rough to say, but let's say the coast was probably merchants. The plain was probably primarily the old landholders, and Megacles, you might recognize his name, is an Alcmaeonid. He's a member of one of the great old Eupatrid clans. And Peisistratos is then the leader of the Beyond the Hills group, which probably comprised small farmers and perhaps the urban poor. Now, Peisistratos had already made a name for himself. He had participated in the war with Megara over the island of Salamis. He had some sort of public presence. And he clearly had ambitions to rule Athens. So far as we know, he made 3 attempts to establish himself as tyrant. The first one, and as you can see, the dates for this, the early part of Peisistratos' history are very, very uncertain. So these are as unreliable as anything. First, the story is that he wounded himself and came into the agora, that came downtown saying he had been attacked, and asked for a civic grant of armed guards, which the assembly gave to him. At this point, incidentally, the now quite old Solon is said to have taken his armor outside of his house and placed it outside, saying, "I'm not going to fight this one." And there is a Solonian poem in which he talks about a wily man who will deceive the minds of the people, and it may be Peisistratos that he's talking about. It lasted a very short time. An alliance of the other two big men, Megacles and Lycurgus, drove him out. Shortly thereafter, he tried something else. He married Megacles' daughter. This sort of alliance among big men by marriage is another common feature. And it's here that Herodotus tells us the wonderful story that Peisistratos found a tall, beautiful young woman from the country named Phue, dressed her up as Athena, got in a chariot that she was driving, and it was announced that Athena was bringing Peisistratos back to Athens. Herodotus treats this as a great good joke. He said the Greeks fancy themselves the smartest of all people, the Athenians fancy themselves the smartest of all Greeks, and they fell for this. I think there's a better way to think about this, which is not that Peisistratos was somehow duping a credulous populace, but instead he was staging a pageant. He was doing something for the entertainment, the amusement of his fellow citizens, and they were all participating in it together as a kind of civic gesture. Peisistratos was very good at a sort of what we might think of as political theater. Nonetheless, the marriage with Megacles' daughter was unsuccessful. Megacles once again got very angry, and Peisistratos was driven out again. This time we know where he went. He went up north to Thrace, where he established some gold mines, became seriously wealthy, and then returned to Athens with a mercenary force, landed at Marathon, and then there was some kind of skirmish. I don't think it even deserves the title of battle, at a place called Pallene in 547-6. But let's think about this for a second. You have a big man with a troop of warriors around him. As a friend of mine has said, we're not that far from the world of the Iliad, are we? With Agamemnon and troops around him. At any rate, we're going to take a brief break here to look at a statue. This is a kouros, clearly modeled on Egyptian predecessors, but unlike the Egyptian models, nude and striding with one foot forward. These were the characteristic markers of the elite at this time. The kouroi began earlier than this. This is a very well-developed one from the late 6th century, and there is attached to it an inscription that says, "Stop and mourn beside the memorial of dead Croesus, whom fierce Ares cut down in the front ranks of battle." It has been quite plausibly suggested that Croesus was a soldier fighting against Peisistratos, who died in that battle of Pallene. There's also one other thing that we can note here, which is his name. It had been thought that perhaps he was some sort of mercenary from Asia Minor. That's where Lydia is, and that's where King Croesus ruled. But he seems likelier to have been a Greek member of an elite family, which may have had some sort of friendly relations with the Lydian king. Peisistratos established his rule very quickly, and seemingly without resorting to violence. There must have been a lot of popular support. He levied a small tax on agricultural produce, and from that, he started a set of public works, among them improving the water supply to Athens by installing public fountains, as in this wonderful black figure vase painting with women carrying jugs to and from a fountain. He allowed for state-supported agricultural loans to small farmers. He set up circuit judges, that is, judges who would go out into the countryside and hear cases. And we are told that he preserved Solon's constitution, except that he took care that his own followers hold the highest offices. We know that he also cleared the agora of private dwellings and began to make it a place for the gathering, the truly gathering of the citizens for the major kind of public buildings and the like. And major public construction also took the form, and now I'm just showing a little bit anachronistically because this we think was actually started by his sons, but this massive temple of Zeus Olympius down next to the Acropolis. You can see it there in the background, which was begun by the Peisistratos, but wasn't really completed until the reign of the Roman Emperor Hadrian, some 6 centuries later. And here is a wonderful 19th century photograph by the French photographer Bonfils. And you can see that some enterprising restaurateur has established a cafe among the columns. But monumental building as a sign of individual pride and of civic identity is something the Peisistratos clearly understood. Also civic religion, and especially cults in honor of Athena. It was Peisistratos who seems to have established the Pan-Athenaic Games. These are the games for all of Athens, and among the evidence we have for them are these extraordinary, huge, they're called the Pan-Athenaic amphorae, these big vases, which held the victor's share, a lot of olive oil, a very valuable commodity. And on one side, they would depict the event that the competitor had taken part in, and on the other side, our patron goddess, Athena. You just saw some runners. There's also the extremely prestigious chariot race. There's a wonderful depiction here of the 2-horse chariot, and again with Athena on the reverse. If this weren't enough, Peisistratos also began a festival in honor of Dionysus, the Dionysia. Seems to have taken the form of competitions of choruses, and eventually it evolved into the great tragic and comic festivals in honor of Dionysus, the city Dionysia and the Lenaea. And it was also under Peisistratos that the Athenians seem to have issued their first coinage, with Athena on one side, you can see her initials here, or the first letters of her name, Atha here, and her owl on the other. First, these would have circulated only within Athens, and eventually they came to be used as currency throughout the Greek world. What we're seeing here is an extremely ambitious, capable, and I might say ethical ruler. A sign of his popularity is that he died in 528-7 of a peaceful old age. We're told that he never had to use a bodyguard. And one of the things that he left as his legacy is Athenian civic identity in the form of buildings, ceremonies, coinage, these circuit riding judges, all of these things together now. We're seeing Athens growing a sense of itself and the Athenians as a special people. I'm not saying we have to accept this, I'm saying that this is how they felt. And yet, when a tyrant dies, there is, as we have seen, often some problem afterward, and that's what we will go on to.